Hi, everyone. Ariana Friedlander here with Rosabella Consulting, and welcome to the Co-Creators in Conversation interview series, where we celebrate leaders who are challenging the status quo and creating economic value by genuinely caring about their people. Right now, I am really excited to be speaking with Charisse Bowen, Program Manager with the Guidehouse, a contracting firm that works with the USDA, or consulting firm, I should say. I will have Charisse introduce herself in just a minute. Welcome, Charisse. But first, I just want to share a little background. Charisse actually was one of the first people that hired Rosabella Consulting and me 10 years ago when I started my business. So speaking with her now is super exciting because she has, I think, a similar story with, I don't know, hundreds probably of other entrepreneurs where she was there at the beginning of the inception of their businesses, looking at logos, giving feedback, whiteboarding things out. So it's really exciting to be here 10 years later having this conversation. So welcome, Charisse.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Would you take a moment to introduce yourself to the listeners? Just tell us a little bit about what you do as program manager at Guidehouse.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Charisse, and I'm a self-proclaimed entrepreneur. Has got herself wound up right now working for the federal government, which is kind of an interesting twist on entrepreneurism, if you will. I always love a good challenge, which is, I think, part of what led me here. I am, as a program manager with Guidehouse right now, my role is running a really large software team, about 80 technologists or so, that help manage all of the software that powers the crop insurance industry for the USDA, for the entire country. There's about 80 applications that I'm responsible for. Sorry, there's my dog sitting behind me there. And we, throughout the day, it's not just keeping the lights on, but we're implementing new systems every time changes happen. With the pandemic, there's been different financial incentives that the government has passed down to help farmers, maintain and sustain through some of the downturns with the economy. We're in charge of helping put in the technology to allow the money to flow freely. When changes come down through farm bills that basically help, create a more improvements in all the various ways that we help improve agriculture through the government. They're implementing the technology to allow that stuff to get executed properly. So it's cool. It's taken me back to my software roots, which is kind of where my entrepreneurial journey began, was with my company, Jen Green.
Yeah, can you tell us about that? Because I know that you're, like you said, you're a self-proclaimed entrepreneur, and you cut out for a second, so I didn't hear the second part, but would love to hear, tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial background, because as I understand it, you've been driving innovation at the USDA that has before you stalled. And so throughout this conversation, I'd be curious to hear how your entrepreneurial background enabled you to do that. So tell us a little bit about that experience, what Jen Green was and what you did there.
Right. Yeah. So Jen Green, I started back in 2006 as a hub for people who wanted to live a more eco-friendly or environmentally sound life, could go and find resources, whether it be a green dry cleaner or vegan restaurant or something in between. We had the largest database of green businesses and organizations in North America in our system. And it was all about finding the different ways of getting that information out. In a lot of ways, we were a content distribution company because we have partnerships with Gannett and National Geographic and other big content distribution companies for that information. And we were pushing it out through our API. That was what I would consider a passion project. I was very passionate about trying to get people to live a more eco-friendly life. I didn't know much about software at the time. And so, but I was hell-bent on learning. I did know a lot about media because I had a mass media communications degree from college. I had worked in television and in advertising, and that had evolved to this point. And so with Jen Green, it was very much, we were kind of at the beginning of this big eco movement, right in the wave. We were able to do some really cool stuff. Like I had one of the first apps in the iTunes store. We were actually one of the first 100 applications in the iTunes store.
Oh, I never knew that. That's so awesome.
Yeah, it was crazy to imagine. We were the very first eco app, kind of would be classified as an eco app ever. And that was just a wild experience. And that really, I think, became the catalyst for me in my whole journey, was like the things that I learned and the people that I got to know and the communities that I got to know, because I got to know so many amazing small businesses and companies that were starting up and really trying to do things differently and really trying to change the world. And these small businesses inspired me, and their owners inspired me. And I think, I knew when it came time to sell Jen Green, I needed to find a way to continue to help people like them, grow their businesses and be more successful and do what I could do to help guide the way. And so, so that led to CSU, where I started the Institute for Entrepreneurship, where I then got to know hundreds of amazing entrepreneurs as they passed through my doors.
Right. And that's where we got to work together on the Women Entrepreneurs Leadership Summit that you launched.
Yes. That was actually the thing that got me the job at CSU. That was
that's right. I forgot. Yeah.
It was like part of my therapy. When I sold Jen Green, and it was after the recession, and there's a whole long story that goes along with that I won't bore everybody, but it was a hard time. As anybody who went through the recession in 2008 and 2009, remember, it was a really hard time to be in business. And I was in a kind of a dark place. I was just I didn't know who I wanted to be when I grew up. And I had felt like because the company didn't go exactly as planned, I felt like I was a failure. And I didn't know how to reconcile with that. And so I decided to reach out to like a lot of the women and my other business owners who I knew been through some stuff in their past too. And I thought, hey, can we come together and have a discussion about what it's like to be a woman business owner in this world and the things that we struggle with. And I remember Dawn Datine at CSU said at the time, she was like, can you do this live and like in front of a lot of my students, this conversation that you want to have, And I was like, sure. Yeah, of course we can, and then it turned into this Women Entrepreneurs Leadership Summit, that we had for a couple of years in a row after that.
Yeah. And it really grew. I mean, substantially. Yeah. The first year was like in one of the smaller rooms in the College of Business. Yeah. And then, quickly outgrew that and needed to go into a ballroom.
Yeah. It was awesome.
It resonated so much. And I think just created a platform for women's voices around these struggles, challenges, and triumphs to be shared. And I know it was super inspiring for me and a lot of the colleagues and friends that were in attendance too. I know we all talked about how wonderful of a source of inspiration that was. So it's cool to hear that came out of this almost journey and process of healing for yourself. And reconciling with how, businesses don't always go the way we plan. And that can be really hard and hurt a lot. And we need to also find a way to move forward. So I love how you parlayed that into something really awesome for the whole community.
Yeah, it's definitely, when I think back to, this whole notion of everything happening for a reason, I look back at that example stands out in my mind as like, had the cards not fallen the way they did, and had I not been in that kind of place, like that beautiful thing wouldn't have emerged. Right. Mm-hmm. And so just this notion of like, when one, door closes, like another window opens, and I walk through every day of my life with that belief. And therefore giving me like I carry a lot less fear and anxiety towards taking chances and failing, because it seems like maybe each chance or failure, each thing that didn't turn out quite the way I had anticipated it, usually it turns out exactly as it was supposed to. And I just have to trust the process.
Yeah. And I think too, it also is helpful for those of us that are visionaries, that do see a way of doing good in the world so clearly that there's a little bit of give and take we have to make room for.
Right.
That if we want things to occur exactly in the image we're holding, we're going to really be disappointed and miss opportunities too, where things could be better than we even imagined possible.
Absolutely.
If we don't let ourselves be open.
Yeah, you have to sometimes just look at these opportunities and say, like, if it seems, and a little bit of how I ended up at the government right now too. I'll skip a few steps, but the role I played previously before this, I was working in the Caribbean and actually was like highly involved in the hurricane recovery effort down there. And again, I was not at all anticipating that to affect me and to resonate with me in the way that it did. And I think came back to the States thinking to myself, like, God, I really wish I could take what I've just learned and find a way to apply it and continue what I'm doing, but I have no idea how I'm going to do that. Like, dear universe, please put something in front of me that I can apply what I've just learned. And this opportunity to come and run first, I'm with USDA now, but prior to this, I was working with FEMA, helping modernize the National Flood Insurance Program. And that opportunity like came kind of out of what I'll say, I feel like was like a mental manifestation of me begging the world to help show me how I can apply what I had just experienced in those hurricanes. Wow. And in a way that would help the greater good.
I wonder if you'll tell us a little bit about the work you did at FEMA, because I know when we spoke before, you mentioned that the project you were heading up other people had tried to drive through this innovation and it failed. I think you said 2 times.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you had inherited. What fell in your lap, and what did you do to get over that hump?
Right. So I think, and this is where sometimes I'll be a bit naive and with, I don't know, lack of baggage can sometimes help, right? So I came into this opportunity and there had been 2 previous modernization attempts, 2 attempts to modernize this technology for FEMA twice before that had failed. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong in the government when developing new software products that can prevent things from ever like making their way to market. Is a lot of people may remember when like Obamacare first came out, and there was I'm going to forget the name of the system that we were all using to try to buy health insurance, but it was like a terrible fail. Everybody was like really disappointed, and it was on the headlines and people were talking about it. And it was, that's the kind of thing that can happen if bad software makes its way to market, right? So was and all the previous attempts had never been able to get to this point that our team was able to get to it. And in part, it was because we really approached it without thinking where all of the guardrails and where all of the bureaucracy and like where all of the red tape existed. And we really tried to approach it applying like more modern software development. We actually brought our team together with a really smart group of people that had like come out of HP and had come out of Agilent and had come out of a lot of the tech startups around this region, and brought everybody together and we're like, let's apply some of the best practices of what's going on, today in this government setting, which weirdly enough, the government had always kind of, because they're afraid of risk and they're afraid of trying things new. It really takes like an assertive push to try to convince them like, hey, take a risk with us. Like, I promise we're going to make this work. The reward will be there. You're just going to have to trust us. And we, basically introduced all of DHS to Agile. The program was actually named like the DHS Agile Program of the Year for all of Department of Homeland Security.
Wow.
And they again, it was like, trust us. And we didn't just say like, trust us and told them, but it was like, let us show you and then earn a little bit of trust. And then we're going to show you again. And then you'll earn a little bit more trust. Then we're going to show you again. And so I think one of the big lessons I learned was this whole, I can't just walk into a place and tell them what I'm going to do and expect them to just comply. Like I'm going to have to find a way of showing them this approach of doing things a little differently in order to gain their trust, to allow us to like do what we actually really need to do. So
that makes so much sense. And I feel like relates to a lot of the tension that occurs with, the programmers, developers, technology, and those that are maybe using that technology is like, you have to meet the users or the people that are wanting to get that developed where they're at. And but also like kind of nudge them along.
Yeah, people don't like change differently. Yeah, people don't like change, whether you're like the end user of a website that, I don't know if you've ever experienced like, oh, my bank decided to totally change up their website and I like can't find anything now and I don't know where anything is. And, and that can be jarring and like sometimes piss enough users off that they'll go to a whole nother bank about it, or they improve on it slowly but surely and make these little incremental changes that like walk people through the process that they need to get. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's like the boiling water pot idea of the frog sits in there and like some cells be cooked versus jumping out if it gets too hot too quickly,
Right. Yeah. There's a positive side, which is, we didn't realize all of these changes were incrementally being made. And now we have this drastically different new
better
platform.
Yeah. And so we did that. That is part of what we had to do with FEMA and with the NFIP system was trying to make these small changes and do it in a way that is, that the government wasn't afraid. And what's weird about whether it's private industry or the government, I think it's very polarizing here is that in the government too, you have a lot of people who they've been working there for a long time. You'll see this in private industry too. They've been working in these companies for a long time. And like you come in with these big innovative ideas and like somehow you're like threatening their baby. The thing that they created 10 years ago, all of a sudden is like being told it's ugly. And they are maybe senior leadership, maybe you don't even realize like why they're poo-pooing your idea or trying to make it sound like it's not going to be possible or whatever. And at the end, it's like their ego that's all weirdly wrapped up in it. We see that with the government a lot because they have a lot of people who've worked there for a very long time, and so there's a lot of this resistance to change isn't always because of like human practice, not liking change. Some of it, it's like they've got their own ego wrapped up in whatever was there before.
Totally. Well, and I see that all the time in my work with clients as well, because we talk about the neuroscience of conversation and different things that can trigger a threat response. And I think one of the things that I have seen time and time again that triggers one of the most intense fight threat responses is territoriality. And so when we have that sense of, this is my turf, this is what I'm responsible for, and someone else is coming in from the outside and, suggesting changes or whatever, there's this strong reflexive reaction to fight it because we want to protect our territory. But like you said, that's the ego. It's not, there's not the big picture being taken into consideration. And so as leaders, it's our job to be able to recognize, hey, this might be an issue where territoriality could come up. So how do we approach this in a way that builds trust, acknowledges those concerns, and addresses them so we can make progress?
Right.
I wonder if you have any examples like of conversations that you navigated or just ways that you approached specific challenges with this project that allowed you to build trust.
Well, I do think that the legacy, we'll say the thing that's being innovated around, and if you're lucky enough to have the inventor of it still there, there's some really good lessons and some good insight and some good information. And like, they shouldn't be discounted just because what they did was out of date now. Right. And so, I think an advanced kind of conscientious innovator is somebody who can really come in and spend some good quality time with the original inventor or inceptor of said idea, understand like the evolution that it's taken over time, and kind of bring them along for the ride within their idea and this new idea, and let them have some co-ownership of it. It will only enrich it. You're not like losing your score by, bringing the original innovator, into the conversation. And if anything, you're enriching it. And so I would, it kind of goes to that co-create concept that you were mentioning earlier, right? Where creators don't create in isolation, right? Some of the most enriching things that get made in the world are done in collaboration. And it's what brings depth and perception and just all kinds of rich ideas to life, is when it has more than just one brain working on it. And so that to me is a great way to dismantle some of the territorialism, the word.
Right. Yeah. Territoriality or something. Yeah. I think what you're describing
is territoriality, right? Is to take those people with you. Yeah,
totally. And I think what you're describing, and I find helps when we're advocating for an idea. A lot of people, I think, assume that they have to sell it, they have to push it, right? And so you work on this presentation, how you're going to pitch it, instead of listening first and pitching second, and that's kind of what I hear you describing in your approach, was to sit down with the people that had created the system that is currently in use, and maybe that are also have sense of ownership over that system, and listen to them, hear their story.
Yeah. And recognize that it's like a natural, it's the natural evolution of innovation, right? If you didn't like bring pieces of the past forward with each like innovative evolution, you will inevitably reinvent the wheel like too many times over, right? And if you look at like products that have improved over time, look at the iPhone, or I don't know, gosh, I have like TVs even, or I don't know, I'm just thinking of the things that are around me. Imagine if like the person who's like, I've got this great idea for the next best phone, did it without like taking into account like everything that's been learned through all the versions of this phone, like leading up to this moment in time, right? And to the degree, if you were like, you're in charge of innovating whatever Apple's 15 iPhone is going to be, you would start with going, well, where have we come, and like, what have we learned, and why, where are we going from here? And that's going to allow us to like retain the investment that we made. Because that's the other thing, like every company that is out there has had some level of investment in this ideas, previous iterations before, right? And they want to know like, oh, I'm going to retain some of that investment. It's going to carry forward, and that's going to encourage me to like spend money on this innovation, because everything that I have done in the past isn't a loss. I'm finding ways of applying it, even if it's just in like lessons learned, So
yeah, and that's such a common decision-making trap too, right? That feeling of sunken costs of, oh, well, I don't want to lose what I already invested, so I'm going to just keep going with what I have,
right?
Instead of shifting gears or reevaluating and refocusing in meaningful ways. Doesn't mean you lose that investment, but I think that's the way, we can look at it if we just have a narrow perspective. To see, I already did all this, I don't want to lose it, and not recognize that it can be building blocks.
Right. Yep, exactly.
I'm curious, like, what are other differences that you've observed, working in private industry with innovative entrepreneurs versus working with the federal government? Like, what insights can you share there for us?
So I think it's really interesting working in an environment in which like top line revenue is not a decision-making driver. When what sells has to be top priority as to what's made, it influences choices and decisions, and sometimes not always for the better, right? What's cool about working in the government is that, at least in these instances, is it's really about like, how do we improve how do we improve our agriculture systems? Like that's the Richter, the measurement that we're being held to. Same thing with, working for FEMA. It's like, how are we making flood victims' lives better? How are we, getting their houses put back together quicker? And so there's something about having that be your like calibration marker that's incredibly rewarding. And there's a huge responsibility because it's taxpayer dollars, and we're all taxpayers. So we often will check ourselves and say, like, are we being as efficient as we can be? We're paying for this as taxpayers. Like, what do we need to do to be smarter about this? Because inevitably, like, it's coming out of our own pockets, right? So we do think about that constantly. But yet at the same time, like, we can make decisions based on what's best for the people, what's best for our end user group, and not like what's best for the budget, or for what's best for the company's next quarter financial reporting. Right. So that's actually a really cool way to do software.
Yeah, that is really cool, especially because there's so many struggles within private industry of having such short-term thinking around, quarterly earnings and things like that can drive decisions that aren't always in the best interest of consumers and users or other stakeholders. And so that doesn't have to be what drives decision-making there can be really freeing. That's so cool to hear.
Yeah. We look at companies like Facebook and what some of these big social media companies and the hot water they're getting themselves in right now by, not making great ethical choices in regards to who they're getting their advertising dollars from, knowing it's at like the price of, social degradation, or people, all of a sudden having, this weird dichotomy of infighting. And it's because, again, you have to look at it. It's a company that's driven based off of its profit model. And you can't stop to forget that that's what it's for, even though it's kind of cloaked in this, like, oh, it's a place where I go and like express my beliefs and I support my friends and family and I do all these things that feel good. At the end of the day, it's not a nonprofit.
Right. Yeah. It's not all of the well wishes
right.
that were sent to those in need that demonstrates success.
Exactly.
Which
is why, like, when Congress holds them accountable and they say, like, why are you doing this to society? I wanted to be like, you guys, this is a business. Like, I know you're holding them to a higher standard, but it is. I don't know why you guys are all surprised. Let's put it that way.
Right. Yeah. It's that there's so many other things to explore that would be interesting to talk about there, particularly, just the advancement of technology without the guardrails of ethical, expectations that are shared like other industries, and you can't become an architect without getting licensed, or a doctor, or so many other industries have these ethical standards by which we expect others in that profession to behave with, and technology just advanced so rapidly we don't have that, and we're starting to feel that tension now.
In a big way.
I wonder, as you mentioned before, the series is about co-creating, and you shared a little bit about how when you bring in new technology or new advancements, building on what was already there is part of the process, because it's better to leverage those experiences and those lessons learned, and more brains can make better things than just one brain. I wonder what else co-creating means to you and how you see that in action with the work you're doing now.
I mean, I love surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me. It's invigorating, and it's one of my favorite things to do. And I think when I consider, tackling a problem, right, and we're like, okay, we've got something to solve. I very rarely, I trying to think of the last time I was having just like a meeting with one or two other people. I'm like one of the first people to be like, okay, like, well, let's bring a group of us together. It doesn't have to be for a long time. We can have a 15-minute huddle, but like, let's have a quick brainstorm this out and try to get as many people's like problem solving, creation making heads into one room at one time. It not only, again, generates like just a great camaraderie and kind of team building, which is so important, but also it's how some of the best ideas come about. And even if somebody's not like contributing to the story, but they're in the room and they're a part of the process, they will inevitably like accept it once it's like coming to life and help like see it through. Like their role might not have been the, I've got the idea, I'm going to make it, but like they do play an important role in like the carrying it out state down the line. Right. And it saves so much time if like all the parts and pieces of your idea's fruition are original like birthing room together. Then you don't have to like share with them, hey, let me tell you how I birthed this idea. And like, we can like save so much time and energy if everybody, regardless of where they stand in the assembly line, is a part of it, coming out the invention box.
Right. Yeah. You're so funny. It's true though. I see that in the work I do, with clients. I do these co-creating experiences, be it a training or a retreat or team building. And there's just so much buy-in because the team's part of having co-created this retreat. Whereas traditionally, it's like the boss that makes the retreat and then comes in and everyone has to just follow like a good little duckling. And people are like, but I don't think we're ducks.
Yeah. Right. And they're like half engaged and they're not paying attention and they're not excited and they're not bringing their like energy into it. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes so much energy to bring a good idea to fruition, whether it's a great retreat, whether it's like, a new application, whatever it might be. And for anybody to not like bring their energy source into the effort, it's like the opposite. It can be like a drain. So it's like whatever you can do to like pull all the creative energy forces into the room together, it just makes it easier.
Right. And then it almost feels like we go back full circle to Jen Green, right? It's regenerative. And this might be a little bit of a stretch, but when we harness that energy from the get-go, it is regenerative and people have more to give to bring those ideas to light. Whereas when we suppress that energy early on because we're not ready for them yet, then it's harder to actually have that energy be present when we need it.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if you remember when I first started Jen Green, right? And this was like, so, I had this big idea for Jen Green and I knew I was in Fort Collins, which was this amazing town of eco-minded people, some great entrepreneurs. And I knew everybody was out there, but I didn't know like how exactly to get started. And so but I knew in order to get this thing off the ground, I needed like a lot of energy behind it and behind me. Right. And so I called this like meeting of the minds and I put an ad in the paper because keep in mind, I had only been in Fort Collins for like 2 weeks at this point. I didn't know anybody. And I put an ad in the paper that was like calling all great green thinkers. I'm having a meeting of the minds at the Chamber of Commerce, which is really kind of ironic and funny that I would ever have had it there.
Right.
But like at the Chamber of Commerce, like come, if you will, and help be a part of this big idea that I have. And I had no idea who was going to show up in the room that day. Right. It could have been no one. It could have been me and my dog. But instead,
he's a great sidekick.
There were like 50 people that came to that event. from all walks of life. In fact, my husband now was there that day.
That's
we
awesome.
were both married to other people at the time. And, but that was the day that I met him. It was the day I met like Katie Hoffner, who ended up becoming like a huge piece of my Jen Green story. Put it this way, like everybody that was in that room, like took a piece of the idea, baby, and like took ownership behind it and like helped bring it to fruition. And have like, and the regenerativeness of it, right? It carried forward and like continued to like reverberate between that community and that group of like co-creators for till now, right? And I mean, it hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
It was just a continuum.
That's such a beautiful story. And we are a little over time, but it's been really fun. I wonder if someone listening would like to get in touch with you or stay in touch with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Probably to hit me up on LinkedIn. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn.
We'll include the link in the show notes.
Yeah. So that's the easiest way. I'm pretty good about getting in there and checking in on that. So
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you, Charisse, for coming on the Co-Creators and Conversation series and sharing your story. It's been so great to have you here and to reconnect with you. I mean, we've stayed in touch over the years, but it's just so fun to reconnect in this vein and share your story.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I've loved talking to you and just the opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in today. If you would like to continue to receive updates about Co-Creators and Conversation interviews, you can subscribe on YouTube. You can also go to rosabellaconsulting.com to check out previous episodes and sign up to get on the email list so that you're notified when a new episode comes out. And thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. And if there's one thing you can take away from this conversation today that you can make into some tangible, actionable inspiration, I encourage you to identify what that is and share it with a friend. Because when we take action from things like this, that's when we start to really see positive change happen. So thanks for joining us. And thank you, Charisse.
Thanks so much.